Right, how are we doing everybody? Welcome to Russell Heritage Golf. Hopefully you guys are all keeping really good. Now in today's video we are going to be talking about the importance of the backswing and the link it can have to offering you freedom in the downswing, and it's going to be demonstrated brilliantly by Martin. Now Martin came for a lesson recently, had a couple of swing issues. Let's get stuck into it and what you guys are going to learn about it as well. Where you are is a bit steep.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're struggling. It's interesting really, because we'll sort of talk about this as the session goes on, but you're sort of recovering much better than you would have done previously, I think. But fundamentally, I still feel like one of the big issues does seem to always creep back to
that, right?
Yeah, this sort of movement forwards. Do you know what I mean?
Interesting that is so steep. I mean, it's steep on the backswing.
Well, this is what I was going to say, because I think what happens, right, is, and you'd probably fall into the category of this, and I think it's obviously people at home, you hit one left, yeah, you hit one right, and that's a little bit you, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah.
You haven't got such a regular pattern one side or another, or it doesn't seem to be so far. And the reason for this is because you're sort of coming down very steep, you're actually becoming much more experienced, where you sort of get out of the way, and you sort of manage the club path quite good.
Yeah.
But the inconsistency is always going to be there, because you're sort of standing up, aren't you? You know, because of this backswing position. So my reservation is when I've watched you hit a couple of shots, to counteract left, right, whatever you're doing, it's sort of hypothetical, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? You're not being able to sort of take control of what you want to be doing, essentially. And that's sort of my concern with what's sort of happening. Because you can't, I don't think you can rectify this.
Yeah.
By trying to work on probably your wrists or your hands and arms.
Yeah.
We have to resolve these. So what we're seeing quite early on in this session is quite a common trait for most amateur golfers. Martin in the backswing position is losing posture. So this means that he's basically just getting closer towards the golf ball, and this takes up loads of space. And as he introduces the downswing motion, although he's trying to do a number of things really good, he's trying to trigger rotation, it's difficult. It's difficult when you're moving closer towards the golf ball. That club shaft is always going to have more of a tendency to get vertical. And this is exactly what's happening with Martin. It's getting a little vertical. He's managing the club path still pretty good, but it's that sort of initial steepness which is probably not going to lead to too much consistency. And I think we'd probably agree that's what Martin is currently demonstrating. So we need to try and find a way to fix it. After a few discussions, what we were able to do is we were sort of just shifting the idea of what a backswing really meant to Martin. And rather than it being this sort of rotational motion and just freewheeling all of his body back towards the side of him, what we started to talk about was, well, let's treat it like it's a little bit more like a shift towards that side, this right-hand side, and just try and get the sense that the club is moving a little bit sort of straighter back. And in essence, that you're trying to lift the club up in the backswing. So it's less of like everything's turning and more kind of like that you're lifting your arms up in the air. And that seemed to do the trick, reference what the lower body was doing. And the nice thing is that the backswing position could be associated under the concept of width. So basically, by just concentrating now on getting more of a sense, even in this with the upper body, pushing the club away from him, that kind of applied width, and it kind of stopped him moving in the way that he had been doing. Now, the thing that I shared with Martin as we were starting to mess around with his wrist positions was really key, because what you're trying to do in the backswing to apply width is you need to make sure that your right palm or your trail palm is pushing onto the left thumb. That's a key thing to apply width. If you're somebody who gets a little limp this way, then that's exactly the thing that isn't happening. Now, with Martin, what was almost happening is that in the backswing, it was kind of like, because he was so concentrating on a wrist cocking motion, he was also sort of cocking his right wrist. Now the problem is if you consciously cock with your right wrist, it is going to give you this sort of tendency for the club shaft to get too steep. But also, if you kind of mess around with this at home, if you kind of, you know, cocking both thumbs towards you, well then what is really sort of pushing away? So it's this hand that's going to be doing the cocking motion. It's this hand which is going to be applying a bit of a hinging action like so. So it's important to understand both of those. And with Martin, what was starting to happen was this idea of width, this idea of the right wrist no longer sort of cocking. And what it started to do is it just started to flatten that lead wrist for Martin. And I don't think that is a bad thing to be doing. As long as you're not flattening that wrist excessively too early in the backswing, I think you take that club back, you start to work a little bit on that hinging action, it flattens that wrist and it gives Martin much more width in that backswing position. And what it's also going to do is it's going to manipulate the shaft angle, so it's going to help the club shaft come down much shallower in the start to the downswing as well. And that's going to help him out in a big way. And if he can just start playing around now with this idea of wide and wide, he's going to be able to take that kind of swing thought straight onto the golf course. And that's really the kind of thing that every golfer is after. I certainly know it's the kind of thing that I'm trying to teach every golfer I get the opportunity to work with.